O heavenly King, comfort of the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good one. Amen.
Sorry. All right. Step 22. On the many forms of vainglory. Some like to distinguish vainglory from pride and to give it a special place in chapter. And so they say that there are 8 capital and deadly sins. But Gregory the theologian and other teachers have given out that there are 7. And I am strongly inclined to agree with him. For who that has conquered vainglory has pride within him? The only difference between them is such as there is between a child and a man, between wheat and bread. For the one is the beginning and the other is the end. And so now that the occasion calls for it, let us speak briefly about the beginning and some of the passions, unholy self-esteem. For if anyone were to try to philosophize at length on the subject, he would be like someone who fusses over the weight of the winds. With regard to its form, vainglory is a change of nature, a perversion of character, a note of blame, and with regard to its quality, it is a dissipation of labors, a waste of sweat, a betrayal of treasure, a child of unbelief, the precursor of pride, shipwreck in harbor, an ant in the threshing floor, which, though small, has designs upon all one's labor and fruit. The ant waits for the gathering of the wheat, and vainglory for the gathering of the riches of virtue. For the one loves to steal, and the other to squander. 3. The spirit of despair rejoices at the sight of increasing vice, and the spirit of vainglory at the sight of increasing virtue. The door of the first is a multitude of wounds, and the door of the second is a wealth of labors. 4. Observe, and you will find unholy vainglory abounding to the very grave in clothes, oils, servants, perfumes, and the like. 5. The sun shines on all alike, and vainglory beams on all activities. For instance, I am vainglorious when I fast. When I relax in the fast in order to be unnoticed, I am again vainglorious over my prudence. When well dressed, I am quite overcome by vainglory. And when I put on poor clothes, I am vainglorious again. When I talk, I am defeated, and when I am silent, I am again defeated by it. However I throw this prickly pear, a spike stands upright. 6. A vainglorious person is a believing idolater. He apparently honors God, but he wants to please not God, but men. 7. Every lover of self-display is vainglorious. The fast of the vainglorious person is without reward, and his prayer is futile, because he does both for the praise of men. 8. A vainglorious ascetic is cheated both ways. He exhausts his body, and he gets no reward. 9. Who will not laugh at the vainglorious worker, standing for psalmody, and moved by this passion, now to laughter, and then to tears for all to see? 10. God often hides from our eyes even those perfections that we have obtained. But he who praises us, or rather misleads us, opens our eyes by his praise. And as soon as our eyes are opened, our treasure vanishes. 11. The flatterer is a servant of devils, a guide to pride, a destroyer of contrition, a ruiner of virtues, a misleader. Those who honor you deceive you, says the prophet. 12. People of high spirit bear offense nobly and gladly, but only holy people and saints can pass through praise without harm. 13. I have seen people mourning who, on being praised, flared up in anger, and as at a public gathering, one passion gave place to another. 14. Who among men knows the thoughts of man, except for the spirit of the man within him? And so let those who try to praise us to our face be silent and ashamed. 15. When you hear that your neighbor or friend has abused you behind your back, or even to your face, then show love and praise him. 16. It is a great work to shake from the soul the praise of men, but to reject the praise of demons is greater. 17. It is not he who appreciates himself who shows humility, for who will not put up with himself? but he who maintains the same love for the very man who reproaches him. 18. I have noticed the demon of vainglory suggesting thoughts to one brother, while he reveals them to another, and he incites the latter to tell the former what is in his heart, and then praises him as a thought reader. And sometimes, unholy creature that he is, he even touches the bodily members and produces palpitations. 19. Do not take any notice of him when he suggests that you should accept the bishopric or abbacy or doctorate, for it is difficult to drive away a dog from a butcher's counter. 20. Whenever he sees that any have acquired in some slight measure a contemplative attitude, he immediately urges them to leave the desert for the world, saying, "Go away in order to save the souls which are perishing." 21. Ethiopians have one kind of face and statues another. So too the vainglory of those living in a community takes a different form from that of those living in a desert. 22. Vainglory incites monks given to levity to anticipate the arrival of lay guests and to go out of the cloister to meet them. It makes them fall at their feet, and, though full of pride, it feigns humility. It checks manner and voice, and keeps an eye on the hand of visitors in order to receive something from them. It calls them lords and patrons, graced with godly life. To those sitting at table it suggests abstinence, and it rebukes subordinate mercilessly. It stirs those who are slack at standing and psalmody to make an effort. Those who have no voice become good singers, and the sleepy wake up. It flatters the conductor, and it begs to be forgiven. It begs to be given first place in the choir. It calls him father and master as long as the guests are still there.
Okay. So any questions or points?
So number 16, it says praise of men and praise of demons. Could you kind of elaborate on that? Like, what's the difference?
Well, when you receive the praise of men, in other words, when people laud you for your work, you can shake it off. But if you think, well, I'm really good, and my work is much better than everybody else's,
So it's like,
that's that, and that whole inner dialogue,
okay.
that's hard to shake off.
I think I understand, but I was still a little confused about talking about being a well-dressed man and then being a poor-dressed man and still feeling vainglorious. That's
Well, to be well dressed, you kind of think to yourself, well, I'm pretty spiffy, right? And but if you're poorly dressed, you say, well, I'm just manifesting monastic poverty, so that everybody can see
and that's still
that I'm really poor.
Oh, okay.
That I'm poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit.
So same thing?
It's the same. It's vainglory, yeah.
Huh.
In other words, whatever we do to be seen by other people, whether it's for praise or whether it's otherwise, it's all about building up our ego, which is what vainglory does, or projecting our ego.
For number 11, it says the flatterer is a servant of devils.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that the flatterer can just be used by devils, or we just shouldn't compliment people?
Compliment is one thing, but flattering somebody is, it's one thing to compliment somebody, it's another thing to be a sycophant, and to just, load it on and to...
Oh, okay.
Essentially butter them up.
What's that?
Essentially butter them up.
Yeah. There was the one line in the first chapter. For if anyone were to try to philosophize at length on this subject, he would be like someone who vainly troubles himself over the weight of the winds. In the Washington class, we've got two super duper climate scientists who trouble themselves over the weight of the winds. So. Anything else? So does this ring? Does this all ring true? Feel slightly convicted? Oh yes, just wait. Wait till we get even further. Yeah. So, okay. You want to go ahead?
Sure. 23. Vainglory makes those who are preferred proud, and those who are slighted resentful. 24. Vainglory is often the cause of dishonor instead of honor, because it brings great shame to its enraged disciples. 25. Vainglory makes quick-tempered people meek before men.
So, do you see the connection with striving towards dispassion? Because if you're dispassionate, you're not going to get resentful. If you're slighted, you're not going to get proud. If you're preferred in something, you just take it as it comes. Honor or dishonor doesn't matter. So go ahead.
26. It has great ambition for natural gifts, and through them often hurls its wretched slaves to destruction. 27. I have seen a demon injure and chase off his own brother, for just as when a brother had lost his temper, secular visitors suddenly arrived, and the wretched fellow resold himself to vainglory. He could not serve two passions at the same time. 28. He who has sold himself to vainglory leads a double life. Outwardly he lives with monks, but in mind and thought he is in the world. 29. If we ardently desire to please the heavenly King, we should be eager to taste the glory that is above. He who has tasted that will despise all earthly glory. For I should be surprised if anyone could despise the latter unless he has tasted the former. 30. Often after being stripped by vainglory, we turn and strip it more cleverly. I have seen some who began spiritual activity out of vainglory, and although they made a bad start, yet the end proved praiseworthy because they changed their intention. 31. He who is proud of his natural advantages, cleverness, ability to learn, skill in reading, and clear pronunciation, quick understanding, and all such gifts received by us without labor, will never obtain supernatural blessings, because he who is unfaithful in a little is also unfaithful and vainglorious in much. 32. For the sake of extreme dispassion, rich gifts, miracle working, and prophetic powers, many exhaust their bodies in vain. They do not know, poor wretches, that it is not toil so much as humility that is the mother of such perfections. 33. He who asks God for gifts in return for his labors has laid unsure foundations. He who regards himself as a debtor will unexpectedly and suddenly receive riches. 34. Do not believe the winnower when he suggests that you should display your virtues for the benefit of the hearers. For what shall a man be profited if he shall bring profit to the whole world and forfeit his soul? Nothing so edifies our neighbor as sincere and humble speech and manners, for this serves as a spur to others never to be puffed up. And what can be more beneficial than this? 35. One who had the gift of sight told me what he had seen. Once he said, when I was sitting in the assembly, the demon of vainglory and the demon of pride came and sat beside me, one on either side. The one poked me in the side with his finger of vainglory and urged me to relate some vision or labor which I had done in the desert. But as soon as I had shaken him off, saying, let them be turned back and put to shame who plot evil against me, then the demon on my left once said in my ear, well done, well done. You have become great by conquering my shameless mother. Turning to him, I made apt use of the rest of the verse and said, let them be turned back and put to shame who has said to me, well done, well done. And to my question, how is vainglory the mother of pride? He replied, praises exalt and puff one up. And when the soul is exalted, the pride seizes it, lifts it up to heaven, and casts it down to the abyss. 36. There is a glory that comes from the Lord, for he says, Those who glorify me I will glorify. And there is a glory that dogs us, though diabolical intrigue, for it is said, Woe when all men shall speak well of you. You may be sure that it is the first kind of glory when you regard it as harmful and avoid it in every possible way, and hide your manner of life wherever you go. But the other you will know when you do something, however trifling, hoping that you will be observed by men. 37. Abominable vainglory suggests that we should pretend to have some virtue that we do not possess, spurring us on by the text, Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. 38. The Lord often brings vainglorious to a state of humility through the dishonor that befalls them. 39. The beginning of the conquest of vainglory is the custody of the mouth and the love of being dishonored. The middle stage is a beating back on all known acts of vainglory, and the end, if there is an end to an abyss, consists in trying to behave in the presence of others so that we are humbled without feeling it. 40. Do not hide your sins with the idea of removing a cause of stumbling from your neighbor, although perhaps it will not be advisable to use this remedy in every case, but it will depend on the nature of one's sins. 41. When we invite glory, or when it comes to us from others uninvited, or when out of vainglory we decide upon a certain course of action, we should remember our mourning and think of the holy fear with which we stood before God in solitary prayer. And in this way we shall certainly put shameless vainglory out of countenance, if we are really concerned to attain true prayer. If this is insufficient, then let us briefly recollect our death. And if this is also ineffective, at least let us fear the shame that follows honor. For he who exalts himself will be humbled, not only there, but certainly here as well. 42. When our praisers, or rather our seducers, begin to praise us, let us briefly call to mind the multitude of our sins, and we shall find ourselves unworthy of what is said or done in our honor. 43. No doubt there are certain prayers of some vainglorious people that deserve to be heard by God. But the Lord has a habit of anticipating their prayers and petitions so that their conceit should not be increased because their prayers have succeeded. 44. Simpler people are not much infected with the poison of vainglory because vainglory is a loss of simplicity and an insincere way of life. 45. It often happens that when a worm becomes fully grown, it gets wings and rises up on high. So too, when vainglory increases, it gives birth to pride, the origin and consummation of all evils. 46. He who is without this sickness is near to salvation, but he who is not free from it is far from the glory of the saints. This is the 22nd step. He who is not caught by vainglory will never fall into that mad pride which is so hateful to God.
Okay. Questions? Comments? Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering with 43 what they meant by about what certain prayers that were that deserve to be heard by God. What is that?
Well, people have prayers that deserve
No specific.
Yeah, but but then what are the prayers that? The question isn't so much what deserves to be heard, but what doesn't deserve to be heard by God. And so we have, for example, the whole parable of the publican and the Pharisee, where the Pharisee, who's Mr. Orthodox, Mr. super self-righteous before God, gets up and prays to himself, as the text says. Lord, I thank you. I'm not like this other guy over here. I'm not a slanderer. I'm not an extorter. And he starts reciting his virtues. Well, God isn't going to hear him because that's pure, unadulterated vainglory and pride, right?
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with God. He may be putting it in the form of a prayer, but he's praying to himself.
Okay.
Because his ego is his God. And so God knows what people want and what they need, and so God will answer those prayers despite us.
Okay.
What else?
I really like the end of 44 when it says, vainglory is a loss of simplicity.
Mhm.
And an insincere way of life.
Yeah. 32, 33 are interesting too. For the sake of extreme dispassion, rich gifts, miracle working, and prophetic powers, many exhaust their bodies in vain. They forget them. They forget, poor wretches, since it is not so much toil as humility that is the mother of such perfections. In other words, we don't earn the perfections. We humble ourselves, and then God can choose to give us, the higher gifts themselves, but we don't earn them. Then in 33, he who asks God for gifts in return for his labors has laid unsure foundations. He who regards himself as a debtor will unexpectedly and suddenly receive riches. In other words, knowing that we don't deserve what the gifts that we receive from God, that's when we make ourselves worthy to receive them. Yeah.
If humility is awarded to us by the grace of God, how do we humble ourselves? Like, how do we kind of get on, like, you know what I'm saying?
Well, humbling ourselves is a means of opening ourselves to humility, of accepting humility. I mean, the state of humility is a gift, is ultimately a gift. But by humbling ourselves, we can attain to, we can prepare ourselves to actually, in a sense, receive that gift. Where it's not, we can bow and scrape and all of that kind of nonsense and think that we're being humble, and indeed, and instead it's all pure vainglory. But if we truly humble ourselves and we don't, and life is not all about gratifying our ego, but for serving the other in love, which is, and in profound honesty, that leads us to a point where you can discern that God has given the gift of humility.
So if let's say you're being rebellious, and you try to strive towards humility, would that also just count as humbling yourself because you're trying to work towards that?
As long as you don't do it to be seen.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the other areas that, and it's interesting, is zeal. We can be very zealous, towards the faith, and especially as converts, and especially as young converts, and we know all about orthodoxy, and we know who's orthodox, and we know who's not orthodox, and we know who's not orthodox enough, especially that bishop there, and that bishop there, and that priest over there. He's really not orthodox enough, and really he's just a Protestant all dressed up, and on and on and on and on, and he's really a heretic when it comes down to it, and on, and we get involved in all of this nonsense, all of this. The judgment and condemnation and slander and usurping the place of God in judgment, and it's totally toxic. Thank God I don't see much of that around here. But it can be a really toxic thing that infects a community and just decimates it. It's Saint Isaac the Syrian has several very choice verses in which he condemns zeal, because usually it's all about vainglory, all coming from pride and vainglory. And it produces an evil fruit. So,
35 was the most interesting to me. They talk about the two demons, and was it the second demon of pride that won out with the, even though he got rid of the first one, the I don't know if I misheard that or not, but the first demon, he in 30, was it 35?
Yeah, it's 35.
And the first demon was Vainglory, and he brushed him away, but the other one, I think, was it Pride, where he had an issue and
Well,
struggled.
Yeah, it's kind
Still
of
lost.
ambiguous as to what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know I'm asking a lot of questions tonight, but
That's okay.
how does someone pull themselves back, I guess, from like a zealot attitude when they when pride and vainglory is set in, like suddenly, like how do you pull yourself back from that?
I think one of the things is that we tend to take ourselves way too seriously, and we kind of need to sit back and look in the mirror and say, "Here I am." I look back in the mirror and do I see a great elder there? Am I the ultimate theologian? You know. It says in here, it quotes in here that one verse, "Let your light so shine before men." Now, how does the hierarchical liturgy begin? You dress up the bishop like the Byzantine emperor. You put candles in his hands. You put a crown on his head. And you say, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify our Father who is in heaven." And then they tell you to live forever. Right? and they wonder why bishops have problems with some of this stuff. Lord have mercy. It's true.
And then everyone's praising you, right? Or
Yeah.
you feel that way, and their praises would be like a death trap,
Oh yeah.
You walk into a kill zone.
Yeah. When he's polite, despota, which means many years, master.
Right.
Sounds like a curse instead of instead of a blessing. Anyway. So, having finished off vainglory, shall we embark on pride?
Yay.
Yeah?
Didn't you just say that if you kill vainglory, you kill pride as well?
That's right.
Step 23. On mad pride, and in the same step, on unclean, blasphemous thoughts. 1. Pride is denial of God, an invention of the devil, the despising of men, the mother of condemnation, the offspring of praise, a sign of sterility, flight from divine assistance, the precursor of madness, the herald of falls, a foothold for satanic possession, source of anger, door of hypocrisy, the support of demons, the guardian of sins, the patron of unsympathy, the rejection of compassion, a bitter inquisitor, an inhuman judge, an opponent of God, a root of blasphemy. 2. The beginning of pride is the consummation of vainglory. The middle is the humiliation of our neighbor, the shameless parade of our labors, complacency in the heart, hatred of exposure, and the end is denial of God's help, the extolling of one's own exertions, fiendish character. 3. Let all of us who wish to avoid this pit listen. This passion often finds food in gratitude. For at first it does not shamelessly advise us to deny God. I have seen people who thank God with their mouth, but mentally magnify themselves. And this is confirmed by that Pharisee who said ironically, "God, I thank thee." 4. Where a fall has overtaken us, Their pride has already pitched its tent, because a fall is an indication of pride. 5. A venerable man said to me, suppose that there are 12 shameful passions. If we deliberately love one of them, pride, it will fill the place of the remaining 11. 6. A haughty monk contradicts violently, but a humble one cannot even look one in the face. 7. The cypress does not bend to live on earth, nor does a lofty-hearted monk do so to acquire obedience. 8. A proud person grasps at authority, because otherwise he cannot, or rather does not want, to be utterly lost. 9. God resists the proud. Who then can have mercy on them? Every proud-hearted man is unclean before God. Who then can cleanse such a person? 10. The proud are corrected by falling into sin. It is the devil which spurs them on. But apostasy is madness. In the first two cases, people have often been healed by men, but the last is humanly incurable. 11. He who refuses reproof shows his passion, pride, but he who accepts it is free of this fetter. 12. An angel fell from heaven without any other passion except for pride. And so we must ask whether it is possible to ascend to heaven by humility alone, without any of the virtues, without any other of the virtues. 13. Pride is loss of wealth and sweat. They cried, but there was none to save, no doubt because they cried with pride. They cried to the Lord, and he heard them not, no doubt because they were not trying to cut out the faults against which they prayed. 14. A most learned old man spiritually admonished a proud brother, but he in his blindness said, excuse me, Father, I am not proud. The wise old man said to him, what clearer proof of this passion could you have given us, son, than to say, I am not proud? 15. Such people can make good use of submission, or more rigorous and humiliating life, and the reading of supernatural feats of the fathers. Perhaps even then there will be little hope of salvation for those suffering from this malady. 16. It is shameful to be proud of the adornments of others, but utter madness to fancy one deserves God's gifts. Be exalted only by such merits as you have had before your birth, but what you got after your birth, as also birth itself, God gave you. Only those virtues which you have obtained without the cooperation of the mind belong to you, because your mind was given you by God. Only such victories as you have won without the cooperation of the body have been accomplished by your efforts, because the body is not yours, but a work of God. 17. Do not be self-confident until you hear the final sentence passed upon yourself, bearing in mind the guest who got as far as joining in the marriage feast, and then was bound hand and foot and cast out into the outer darkness. 18. Do not lift up your neck, creature of earth, for many, though holy and spiritual, were cast from heaven. 19. When the demon of pride gets a foothold in his servants, he appears to them either in sleep or in a waking vision, as though in the form of a holy angel or some martyr, and gives them a revelation of mysteries, or free bestowal of spiritual gifts, so that these unfortunates may be deceived and completely lose their wits. 20. Even if we endure 1,000 deaths for Christ, even so shall we not repay all that is due. For the blood of God and the blood of his servants are quite different. And I am thinking here of the dignity and not of the actual physical substance. 21. We should constantly be examining and comparing ourselves with the Holy Fathers and the lights who lived before us, and we should then find that we have not yet entered upon the path of the ascetic life, and have not kept our vow in holy fashion, and in disposition are still living in the world. 22. A monk, properly speaking, is he whose soul's eye does not look haughtily, and whose bodily feeling is unmoved. 23. A monk is he who calls his enemies to combat like wild beasts, and provokes them as they flee from him. 24. A monk experiences unceasing rapture of mind and sorrow of life. 25. A monk is one who is conditioned by virtues as others are by pleasures. 26. A monk possesses unfailing light in the eye of the heart. 27. A monk has an abyss of humility into which he has plunged and suffocated every evil spirit. 28. Forgetfulness of our sins is the result of conceit, for the remembrance of them leads to humility. 29. Pride is utter penury of soul, under the illusion of wealth, imagining light in its darkness. The foul passion not only blocks our advance, but even hurls us down from the heights. 30. The proud man is a pomegranate, rotten inside, while outwardly radiant with beauty. 31. A proud monk has no need of a devil. He has become a devil and an enemy to himself. 32. Darkness is foreign to light, and a proud person is foreign to every virtue. 33. In the hearts of the proud, blasphemous words will find birth, but in the souls of the humble, heavenly contemplations. 34. A thief abominates the sun, as a proud man scorns the meek. 35. I do not know how it is, but the proud for the most part remain ignorant of their real selves, and they imagine that they are victorious over their passions, and they only realize their poverty when they depart from this life. 36. The man enmeshed in pride will need the help of God, for the salvation of men cannot avail him. 37. I once caught this mad impostor as it was rising in my heart, bearing on its shoulder its mother, Vainglory, roping them in with a noose of obedience and thrashing them with a whip of humility. I demanded how they got access to them. At last, when flogged, they said, "We have neither beginning nor birth, for we are the originators of all passions. Contrition of heart that is born of obedience is our real enemy. We cannot bear to be subject to anyone. That is why we fell from heaven, though we had authority there." In brief, we are the parents of all that opposes humility, for everything which furthers humility opposes us. Our powers extend to all short of heaven. So where will you run from our presence? We often accompany patience under dishonor and obedience, and freedom from anger and lack of resentment, and service of one's neighbor. Our offsprings are the sins of spiritual people: anger, calumny, spite, irritability, shouting, blasphemy, hypocrisy, hatred, envy, disputing, self-will, disobedience. There is only one thing in which we have no power to meddle, and we shall tell you this, for we cannot bear your blows. If you keep up sincere condemnation of yourself before the Lord, you can count us as weak as a cobweb. For pride's saddle horse, as you see, is vainglory, on which I am mounted. But holy humility and self-accusation laugh at both the horse and its rider, happily singing the song of victory. Let us sing to the Lord, for gloriously has he been glorified. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea and into the abyss of humility. This is the 23rd step. He who mounts it, if anyone can mount it, will be strong.
Okay, so any questions? James?
When they spoke of the angel that fell to pride, they're speaking of the
Lucifer,
evil one.
yeah.
Okay, I thought so, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah. Lucifer and all those who fell with him.
Yeah. And it was just pride. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah, he wanted to be God.
In 37, when they say, "We have neither beginning nor birth, for we are the originators of all the passions." And then, skipping forward a little, "That is why we fell from heaven, though we had authority there."
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about what they're...
Well, I mean, this refers to the whole understanding, actually much more illuminated in the book of Enoch than the existing Old Testament, and the story of the fall of the angels from heaven, following Lucifer, and which had its source in pride, and And so the angels who fell were angels, and they had a authority in heaven. That's what angels have or do or are, and so when they fell, they of course lost that. Michaela, what do you think of all of this?
Well, it crossed my mind during between 15 or 16, it was mentioned that we are gifted with different gifts, each of us. In everyday life, right now, we apply these gifts in helping others, in doing our work. And it crossed my mind the fact that when, for instance, when you go to get a job interview, you have to list basically all your gifts in there, and this is perceived basically as being proud of what you've been gifted with. And how can we not fall into this pride when we bump into it at hiring? You have to list all the gifts, all the skills that God gave you, and it's inevitable.
Yeah, and that's true, and that's part of that's the world, which is the construct of our passions. And of everybody's passions altogether. But acknowledging that God gave us certain gifts is not pride in and of itself. Especially if we acknowledge that God gave us these gifts, and they're not simply, and it's not something that we earned or something like that, or that makes us better than anybody else. We just have to humbly say, yes, that I can do these things.
I guess to follow up on that line of questioning, if you could say a few words about how to balance a couple of things. There are certain domains of life in which self-promotion help you succeed, and in fact, it can be difficult not to succeed if you aren't willing to do this to some extent. So there are two responses. One is to try to do this in a non-sinful way, and the other is just to step away from that that mode of life, and if that's a career, maybe do something else. And of course, this might vary from person to person what you should do, but maybe you have some comments on this.
Well, it does vary from person to person, because some people can handle it and others can't. If it's going to lead you off on an ego trip of some kind of self-delusion, and you realize that, then you probably should step away from it. But there's some positions are just you have no choice but to self-promote if you're going to, and if you're suited for that position, truly suited, because there's a lot of positions that people lust after, which they're not suited for. In other words, it's all self-delusion out of pride and vainglory. Then that will be extremely harmful. But if you can honestly say, well, I'm qualified to do this, and you can do it without arrogance and without conceit and without pride and without vainglory, but simply know that that's your spot, and you don't have to kill anybody to get to it. It's not necessarily sinful by any means, but if it's some kind of competitive thing where the only way you can get to it is to tear down the other person, just look at our politics right now. Just hideous on all sides. it's not, you know, that kind of you know, tearing down the other and name calling and all of that stuff is just that's grossly sinful. So there was some issue. Anyway, if a candidate was running on something and they did, or an incumbent was running on something and they did something for the public good, and they considered it was that which is the job, but they considered it for the public good that they get reelected. Well, is it? Or is that pride and vainglory? Is that self-deceit? Is that, you know, some kind of is that a bunch of sycophants, you know, who are pushing their agenda for their own reasons and all of that stuff? Takes discernment. Okay. Then there's the rest of this chapter.
There we go. Concerning unmentionable blasphemous thoughts. 38. We've heard that from a troublesome root and mother comes a most troublesome offspring. That is to say, unspeakable blasphemy is born from foul pride. So it is necessary to bring it into the open, for it is no ordinary creature, but the most cruel of all of our foes and enemies. And what is still worse, it is difficult to put into words, confess, or expose these thoughts to a spiritual physician. And so this unholy disease has produced frustration and despair in many, destroying all their hope like a worm in a tree. 39. During the Holy Liturgy, at the very moment when the mysteries are being accomplished, this vile enemy often blasphemes the Lord and the holy events that are being enacted. This shows clearly that it is not our soul that pronounces these unspeakable, godless, and unthinkable words within us, but the God-hating fiend who fled from heaven for uttering blasphemies against the Lord there too, as it would seem. For if these shameless and disgraceful words are my own, how could I worship after receiving the gift? How can I praise and revile at one and the same time? 40. This deceiver and corrupter of souls has often driven many out of their mind, for no other thought is so difficult to tell in confession as this. That is why it often remains with many to the very end of their lives. For nothing gives the demons and bad thoughts such power over us as nourishing and hiding them in our heart unconfessed. 41. No one in the face of blasphemous thoughts need think that the guilt lies within him. For the Lord is the knower of hearts, and he is aware that such words and thoughts do not come from us, but from our foes. 42. Drunkenness is a cause of stumbling, and pride is a cause of unseemly thoughts. As far as his stumbling is concerned, the drunkard is not to blame, but he will certainly be punished for his drunkenness. 43. When we stand in prayer, those unclean and unspeakable thoughts assail us, but if we continue praying to the end, they retire at once, for they do not fight with those who stand up to them. 44. The godless foe not only blasphemes God and everything divine, but utters the most shameful and indecent words within our minds to make us either give up praying or else despair ourselves. He has prevented many from praying and separated many from the holy mysteries. 45. This evil and inhuman tyrant has wearied the bodies of some with grief, has exhausted others with fasting, and has given them no rest. He does this with those living the monastic life as well as with people living in the world, suggesting to them that there is no hope whatsoever of salvation for them, and assuring them that they are more to be pitied and more wretched than all the unbelievers and the heathen. 46. He who is troubled by the spirit of blasphemy and wants to be delivered from it should know for certain that it is not his soul that is the cause of such thoughts, but the impure demon who once said to the Lord, "All these things will I give thee if thou wilt fall down and worship me." And so let us too humiliate him, and without paying the least regard to his suggestions, say to him, "Get thee behind me, Satan. I shall worship the Lord my God, and him only will I serve. Thy labor and thy word will return upon thy head, and thy blasphemies will come down upon thy crown in the present and in the future world. Amen." 47. He who wants to grapple with the demon of blasphemy in any other way is like a man trying to hold lightning in his hands. For how will you catch or contend and grapple with one who bursts into the heart suddenly like the wind, utters words quicker than a flash, and immediately vanishes, although their enemies stop, wrestle, linger, and give time to those who wish to struggle with them? But not this one. He has scarcely appeared, and he is gone. He has hardly said a word, and he is away. This demon often likes to haunt the minds of the simple and innocent people, and they are more upset and bewildered by it than others. We can certainly say of them that all this happens to them not from self-esteem, but from the envy of the demons. 49. We ought to stop judging and condemning our neighbor, and then the blasphemous thoughts will not alarm us, for the former is the occasion and the root of the latter. 50. As one who is shut up in his house hears the words of passers-by without joining in their conversation, so the soul, keeping to itself and overhearing the diabolical blasphemies, is troubled by what is said by the demon passing by it. 51. He who despises this foe is delivered from its torture, but he who contrives some other way to wage war with it will end by submitting to it. He who wishes to conquer the spirits with words is like one trying to lock up the winds. 52. One careful monk, who was troubled by this demon, wore out his flesh for 20 years by fasts and vigils. But as he felt no benefit, he wrote his temptation on a card and went to a certain holy man and gave him the card and bowed his face to the earth, not daring to look up. As soon as the elder had read it, he smiled, and raising to the brother, said to him, "Lay your hand on my neck, son." And when the brother had done that, the great man said, "On my neck, brother, be this sin, for as many years as it may or may not be active in you. Only after this, ignore it." And this monk assured me that even before he had left the elder's cell, his infirmity had gone. The man who had been tempted in this way told me this himself, offering thanksgiving to God. He who has won the victory over this infirmity has banished pride.
So, yeah.
So, what necessarily falls into the category of blasphemies?
Blasphemous thoughts would be, well, I mean, anything like, thoughts against God, against the saints, against holy things, the thought of that God is not real, that God is evil, or God does not, or that He doesn't love us, and that He's cruel and wrathful, and all of that is blasphemy. But there's another thing that it mentions in here, which is interesting, and that's also the thought that I can't be saved. God can't save me. I'm too big a sinner for God to save me. I've done too many evil things for God to be able to forgive me. I've done things that God can't forgive me for. Of course, this is blasphemy. It's also self-delusion. It's pride. It's vainglory. It's kind of the summation of all of the passions too, thinking that we can do something that God can't forgive. And in reality, it's all about us not being able to forgive ourselves. And so what does it do? It leads us to refuse God's grace. There's that. It's 45. This evil and inhuman tyrant has wearied the bodies of some with grief, has exhausted others with fasting, and has given them no rest. He does this with those living the monastic life as well as with people in the world, suggesting to them that there is no hope whatsoever of salvation for them, and assuring them that they are more to be pitied and more wretched than all the unbelievers and heathen. I dare say it's another word for this is Calvinism, but I don't think I would be exaggerating too much.
Reading this book
Uh-huh.
without prayer can cause the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's one of the problems with it. That's why to read it in a guided way, like this, is one thing. But to just, be some kid picking it up, especially if there's already a foundation of self-hatred and self-loathing, it's a recipe for suicide, actually. So I don't recommend it as a general book for everybody, for every new convert to pick up. The newly minted Barsanuphius, whoever that might be. So, and the thing is, this is that, and on a kind of surface reading, it can really lead you into despair. On the other hand, it's part. There's an underlying message in saying God's grace transcends all of that, and we can't, and it's foolish to try and earn your salvation because it's a great gift.
That's why I said without prayer.
Right.
If you got a foundation of prayer, then you see yourself in it, and you know where to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Couldn't the same things be said about the law of Moses? Does that have a similar effect?
Well, law of Moses is not about salvation. The law of Moses is about living well in this world.
Right, but what I was saying is that essentially it's not the same, but it had a similar effect. Those that were living in prayer before the Lord, like sincerely walking with God,
Uh-huh.
it helped them walk with God, and it
Right,
helped
exactly.
It was a teacher along
Right.
the way. And to those that weren't walking with God,
Mm-hmm.
it was a cause of despair, and a cause of stumbling and destruction.
Right.
It was a stumbling block. That's in the comparison.
Right.
To those that are not walking with God, it will destroy you. But to
Right.
those that
Exactly.
are walking with God, it'll be wings and
Mhm.
help carry you along.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, and
the similarity I was saying between the two.
yeah. I'll read Psalm 118. I mean, it's exactly. So, what else? Everybody knows what it's like to get blasphemous thoughts. Sadly, it's something universal. And when I talk about logos me, and dealing with the thoughts, I mean, they can come up at the most inopportune times. Have some scene from a movie come across your mind as you're trying to consecrate the gifts, or preparing for communion or something like that, and leaving you feel just defiled, on one hand. So.
Well, what should be done in such a case?
Ignore it.
So basically carry on.
Yeah, it's just It's just
You
thoughts.
just push through it.
Yeah, you just push through it. You don't pay any attention to it.
It says, get behind me, Satan.
Yeah, go away.
It's like, if you can hear the bullet buzzing, you should ignore it because it didn't hit you.
Right. Uh-huh.
You shouldn't be afraid of the bullets you can hear. You should be afraid of the bullets that hit you.
Right. Right.
So therefore, there's no reason to flinch on the battlefield.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Walk around boldly like the British.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember if it was Elder Ephraim or St. Paisius who said, let your thoughts be like a plane. Just let it pass by, don't let it land.
Yeah. Or the Benedictine elder that I got to know, he said, just because there are birds flying outside the window doesn't mean you have to reach out and catch them.
That's good. Ladika, what about when the thought is accompanied by like a feeling in the chest? You know, like a physical sensation with the thought.
Well, you have then it's revealing a passion that there's and it's probably connected to something much deeper. It's probably connected to some memory or something like that, or some resentment or some sin or that's buried or something like that needs to get brought out. So.
Step 24. Meekness, simplicity, guilelessness, which come not from nature but from habit, and about malice. 1. The morning light precedes the sun, and the precursor of all humility is meekness. Therefore let us hear in what order the light arranges these virtues. For he says, learn of me, for I am meek and humble in heart. So then before looking at the sun, which is humility, we must be illumined by the light, which is meekness. And then we can look with a clear gaze at the sun. For it is impossible, absolutely impossible, to gaze upon the sun before we have experienced that light, as we have learnt from the order in which the Lord has put these virtues. 2. Meekness is an unchangeable state of mind, which remains the same in honor and dishonor. 3. Meekness consists in praying calmly and sincerely for a troublesome neighbor. 4. Meekness is a rock overlooking the sea of irritability which breaks all the waves that dash against it, yet remains completely unmoved. 5. Meekness is the buttress of patience, the door, or rather the mother of love, and the foundations of discernment, for it is said, the Lord will teach the meek his way. It prepares us for the forgiveness of sins. It is boldness in prayer, an abode of the Holy Spirit. But to whom shall I look? Even to him that is meek and quiet. 6. Meekness is the fellow worker of obedience, the guide of the brotherhood, a curb for the furious, a check to the irritable, a minister of joy, the imitation of Christ, something proper to angels, shackles for demons, a shield against peevishness. 7. In meek hearts the Lord finds rest, but a turbulent soul is a seat of the devil. 8. The meek shall inherit the earth, or rather shall exercise dominion over it, but bad-tempered folk will be harried out of their land. 9. A meek soul is a throne of simplicity, but an angry mind is a creator of evil. 10. A quiet soul makes room for words of wisdom, for the Lord will guide the meek in judgment, or rather in discernment. 11. An upright soul is a fellow lodger with humility, but an evil one is a daughter of pride. 12. The souls of the meek are filled with knowledge, but an angry mind is a denizen of darkness and ignorance. 13. An angry man and an impostor met one another, and it was impossible to find a true word in their conversation. Unveiling the heart of your former, you will find frenzy. Looking into the soul of the other, you will see malice. 14. Simplicity is a constant habit of soul that has become immune to evil thinking. 15. Evil is a science, or rather a diabolical deformity, bereft of truth and thinking it can hide that fact from public notice. 16. Hypocrisy is a contrary state of body and soul interwoven with every kind of subterfuge. 17. Guilelessness is a joyous state of soul far removed from all ulterior motive. 18. Honesty is unmeddling thought, sincere character, frank and unpremeditated speech. 19. Innocence is he whose soul is in natural purity as it was created, and who makes intercession for all. 20. Malice is a perversion of honesty, a deceitful way of thinking, falsely screened by affability, false oaths, ambiguous words, dissimulation of heart, an abyss of cunning, deceit that has become a habit, conceit turned into nature, a foe to humility, a pretense of penitence, diminution of mourning, hostility to confession, willfulness, an agent of falls, a hindrance to resurrection, a smiling at offenses, affected frowning, false reverence, diabolical life. 21. An evil person is a namesake and companion of the devil. That is why the Lord taught us to name the devil, saying, "Deliver us from the evil one." 22. Let us run from the precipice of hypocrisy and from the pit of duplicity, hearing him who said, "Evildoers shall be destroyed, as the green herb, and they shall quickly wither, for such folk are food for demons." 23. God is called love, and also justice. That is why the wise man in the Song of Songs says to the pure heart, "Justice has loved thee." Also the father of the wise man says, "Good and just is the Lord." And of those who are his namesakes, he says that they are saved, who saves the upright of heart. And again, his countenance sees and visits those who are honest and just. 24. The first property of the age of childhood is uniform simplicity. And as long as Adam had it, he did not see the nakedness of his soul or the indecency of his flesh. 25. Excellent too is the simplicity which in some by nature, yes, and blessed, but not as much as that which is grafted and with toil and trouble after repenting from sin. For the former is sheltered and protected from much affection and passion, but the latter leads to the highest humility and meekness. The former has not much reward, but the latter infinite. 26. Let all of us who wish to attract the Lord to ourselves draw near to him as disciples to the Master, simply, without hypocrisy, without duplicity or guile, not out of idle curiosity. He himself is simple and absolute, and he wants souls that come to him to be simple and innocent, for you will surely never see simplicity separated from humility. 27. The evil man is a false prophet who thinks that from words he can catch thoughts, and from outward appearance dispositions of the heart. 28. I have seen honest souls who learnt to be evil from evil people, and I wondered how they could lose their natural disposition and superiority so soon. But it is as easy for the honest to fall from grace as it is difficult to change the dishonest. But true exile, obedience, and guarding of the lips have often had great power, and have wonderfully restored the incurable. 29. If knowledge puffs up many people, simplicity and lack of learning can perhaps in the same measure humble them. All of the same there are here, and there people who pride themselves on their ignorance. 30. The thrice blessed and most simple Paul was a clear example for us, for he was the rule and the type of blessed simplicity. For no one, absolutely no one, has ever seen or heard or could see so much progress made in such a short time. 31. A simple-hearted monk is like a rational, dumb animal who lays his burden on his director. An animal does not answer back his master who yokes him, nor does an honest soul do this with his superior, but follows wherever he is led. Though sent to the slaughter, he can make no protest. 32. It is hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven, and equally hard for those who are foolishly wise to enter simplicity. 33. A fall is often corrected the clever, giving them salvation and innocence in spite of themselves. 34. Struggle to elude your own prudence, and by so doing you will find salvation and honesty through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. He who has strength for this step, let him take courage, for he who has become an imitator of Christ, his master, and has been saved.
I
Please.
guess my question is, how many stories are there of evil becoming good versus, it seems like it's usually the other way around, good becoming evil? I don't know. I guess that's my question. Doesn't seem like there's very many that way, any stories of evil becoming good.
Well,
That's a good question.
It just seems, in the scriptures, are there any examples or stories of that happening, or is it usually?
Yeah, Paul, the Apostle Paul, for example, repentance. Yeah. It's all about the evil becoming good.
Okay.
And so what Christianity is, the call to the evil to become good, that call to repentance. And so it's possible, and we believe in change.
Right.
There are, of course, stories of the good who squander that gift and become and follow after evil. But and that may make for good Hollywood.
Right.
But that's not what Christianity is about.
There is a little bit in here about being simple and uncalculating, and I wondered if you could say a little bit about that, with in mind a verse from Scripture that we should be gentle as doves but wise as serpents. So the image I have is of a serpent who is a little bit calculating and is able to plan for maybe malicious actors who are trying to do something to undermine something good that you might want to accomplish. But on the other hand, here we have the idea that we should avoid calculation. So is there a tension here, or how are we to understand that sort of thing?
Well, one of the things is that this is written specifically to a monastic context, and this is written for people who are beginning the life of obedience, and so that kind of simplicity and to be very obedient and very compliant and cooperative, without trying to figure out how you can manipulate and get your own will, which would be guileful, right? Whereas to be guileless is you simply accept what you're given. And that doesn't mean that you accept things that are illegal or immoral or something, but that you rather you trust the elder that he's going to give you what you need, because you know that he loves you and you love him, and that's the point. That's the nature of the relationship. And even when he's trying to protect you from yourself, which is half the time, dealing with novices. So.
If I could follow up, I guess what strikes me is that I do have the intuitive feeling that being too calculating there's something that feels suspicious about it.
Right.
So I can appreciate why he would say that, and it seems to me that there probably is some wisdom for us outside the monastery as well.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just wondering. It seems to me we are on the other hand supposed to be as wise as serpents. So I guess how do we thread that without going too far in the one direction or the other?
Well, if you're calculating and trying to make your boss do things your way, so that and when you really don't have the slightest clue, but you want it done your way so that it's easier on you or whatever, then and he falls for it, which is even just as bad. And so there are things like that, so this kind of selfish manipulation of others and things like that. It's just evil, you know. And it's ultimately very it's self-defeating. So yeah.
Would it depend on what ends you're, would it depend on the ends by which you're aiming? So if your end is for the benefit of others and not for yourself?
Well, it depends on what it is. If you're in a situation of obedience and yet you're still trying to manipulate somebody to get your own will, then that's wrong, right? And you know, and so ultimately, and the context is this chapter on humility and simplicity.
Right.
You know, what does it mean to have that kind of purity of heart, that kind of simplicity? There was a kid who had joined the monastery in Menton, and he had such simplicity and such purity of heart that every time he would come to confession, I was embarrassed. Because he just showed me to be a total hypocrite. You know, of course, nobody would know that, but that was how I felt. You know, well, or maybe they did know that, but you know. But I mean, you know, and to find you know, people like that is very unusual, who have that kind of radiant purity. So, where there's no guile. So, and it's a beautiful thing. And our culture is, I mean, it fosters guile. You know, and so and how sad that is.
But not only fosters it, it praises it. It finds it praiseworthy to be full of God.
Right.
When it's in fact the opposite.
Right.
So that brought the question to my mind, what was this young man's history? How did he?
He was raised in a very pious Orthodox home. He was homeschooled, and the day, well, actually,
He was protected
no, he did.
from the
He
world.
was protected. No, he wasn't homeschooled. He was homeschooled most of his life. He went to public high school, but the day after he graduated from high school, he had his parents bring him to the monastery.
He was the deacon, the person you're speaking about, I know. And,
Yeah.
And I was going to say something about that. He was amazing at being able to watch his thoughts and separate himself from his thoughts. You could tell he practiced this whole thing we talked about.
Yep.
Being able to not identify with his thoughts, and that's how he could confess so well, I think.
Yeah.
That he could see it.
Yeah. At 18.
The light of God, was
Yeah.
showing these things to him because he could separate from
Yeah.
the thoughts.
Yeah. So, you know, so at 18 years old, as a novice, I mean, we never could have told him that, but he had more maturity than almost anybody else, and spiritual maturity than almost anybody else in the Brotherhood, including the 60-somethings. So some of these things
Did
are.
he stay on that path?
Yep.
And he's still just the same. Doesn't change. Now he stays it, he's just the same. That's why